Alright, today we're going to start a new factoring method, factoring by grouping, and so it is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to group items together so that we can make them into the two separate parentheses that were typical answers or the way they normally look. Normally we can just group the first two together and the last two together, and that will work for most of the cases. Every once in a while we'll have to do some rearranging. But what you're doing when you group them is you're pulling out the greatest common factor. So you're going to pull out a 5 in this case because the greatest common factor between 5 and 20 is 5. And the most t's that they share in common is t cubed. 5t cubed times t gives you the 5t to the fourth, plus 5 times 4 gives you the 20, and then you distribute that t cubed through. Plus the greatest common factor between 6 and 24 is 6, and so when you distribute the 6 through, you'd get t plus 6 times 4 is 24. Now, our goal is to make sure that these sets of parentheses are identical, because if they are identical, we can just write them one time, and then we can put the parts out in front, the parts that we would be distributing to those, in a separate set of parentheses. Notice how that works out. Up here, you would distribute the 5t cubed to both of those parts. The same thing you would do if you were foiling. That would be your first term times your first term and your outer term times your outer term. The other part that you would be doing up here in this problem is distributing your 6 through. That's what you would do when you're foiling, when you're doing your inner term times your inner term and your last term times your last term. So that's why the answer ends up looking like this, and we can write it one time because both of those items are being multiplied by the same amount. So we're going to use factor by grouping when we see these four terms. We know how to factor trinomials and some of those other special cases, binomials. So again, I have four terms, and we're going to go ahead and try the grouping again. We're going to group them just by the first terms and the last terms. As I said, right now, that's typically going to be the case, but every once in a while we might have to do some rearranging. That's not going to happen very often. How we're going to know we have to do the rearranging is if we don't get the same thing inside the parentheses. So the greatest common factor between 12 and 9 is 3. So I'll pull out a 3, and 3 times 4 gives us the 12. Now they also share a's in common, so I need to pull off the a's. There's two a's in common, so an a squared. So when I distribute, I'd have 4a on the inside plus 3 times negative 3 gives me negative 9, and a squared would be distributed through. Plus, greatest common factor is 5, so I'm left when I distribute with 4a plus negative 3. Notice I have the same thing inside the parentheses, so I write that one time. I'll just go ahead and simply write it as 4a minus 3. The stuff on the outside of the parentheses I'll write together. 3a squared plus 5. In the next example, I'm going to do the same type of grouping. Group the first two, group the last two. I'm going to change my sign still. Greatest common factor between 45 and 9 is 9. They share 3 m's in common, so m cubed. Okay, and 9 times 5m gives me 45m to the fourth. And 9 times, I would have to put a negative 1 here. 9 times 1 is 9, and to the m cubed times 1 is m cubed. Plus, the greatest common factor here would be 6. And they both share an m in common, so I need to pull out an m. 6 times 5 gives me the 30m times m is m squared, plus 6m times negative 1 will give me the negative 6m. So again, I end up with the same thing inside the parentheses. I'll write that one time as 5m minus 1 instead of 5m plus negative 1, same thing. And then out front I'll write 9m cubed plus 6m.